Welcome to IT Visionaries, created by The Mission, your number one source for accelerated learning.
On this episode of IT Visionaries, Ian sits down with Sophia Cui, Chief Technology Officer of Jobscan. Together they talk about startup mentality, how to attract the best and brightest talent, and how GDPR is influencing the future of cybersecurity.
IT Visionaries is brought to you by the Lightning Platform by Salesforce. The Lightning Platform is a leading cloud platform that makes building AI-powered apps faster and easier. With Salesforce, now everyone is empowered to build apps for their organization. Learn more at salesforce.com/buildapps.
Welcome to another episode of IT Visionaries. Today, we are joined by Sophia Cui, the CTO at Jobscan. Sophia, how's it going?
Pretty good, Ian. So, Seattle's getting colder and everyone's kind of huddled and outside it's really gray. But, there are things to look forward to like pumpkin spice lattes and
That's
a
right.
warm blanket.
It's pumpkin spice latte season. So at least there's a win there. Yeah, we're super excited to have you on today. We wanted to talk about machine learning, and Jobscan is a startup. You're the CTO there. And there's some really cool kind of advantages that we've talked about in the past, but not on a podcast yet, about this difference between the startup mentality and big company mentality. And I think sometimes there's a perceived advantage to one or the other that, big companies are like, well, we're a gigantic ship where it's slow moving. It's not necessarily as fast as you want it to be. Whereas, the startup kind of has that speedboat, but you hit the waves when you're in a speedboat, and sometimes that can be pretty rough. So we wanted to talk to you about machine learning and the things that you're seeing from the startup world and how some of those advantages of being lean and nimble can apply to big companies. So let's first get into a little bit about your background. How did you become CTO of Jobscan?
Yeah, so my background when I was an undergrad was computer science. I loved computers growing up. I remember when I was in middle school, I went to my local library and checked out all the books on QBasic. And my dad had a 486, and that never really stopped. So I worked for Microsoft for a number of years, which was a very natural fit, but I wanted to make more of an impact. And I went to business school afterwards to really try to expand my product and business horizons. After business school, I and my friend Xenia, we started a company called Civic Up, which is to promote civic issues and have people be more civically engaged. And Jobscan is my second startup, so I currently own pretty much anything technical here. And Jobscan is a service, and we help job seekers. So job seekers, when they apply to companies, a lot of the times their resumes get lost because big companies use something called applicant tracking systems. And applicant tracking systems use software algorithms to filter and rank and rate candidates. And we want to shed light for the job seekers on how they can get past that hole.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because job seekers don't necessarily understand how much of the algorithm they're fighting when they apply for roles. And, we all know that the best way into a company is that you're ideally going to have 3 references from internal and you're referred from a senior executive or something like that. But a lot of times that's just not the case. And it's really interesting what you're doing at Jobscan is kind of almost democratizing some of that algorithm love back to the job seeker.
Absolutely, yes. So we use a bunch of algorithms reverse engineered from ATSs, or applicant tracking systems. And also we have our own machine learning algorithms that will predict things that are missing in your resume, things that are missing from the job description, help you fill in the gaps.
Let's get into kind of some of those best practices that you've learned, as a startup and kind of building this from scratch. What are some of the takeaways that, big companies can learn from the different things that you've kind of been jamming on for the past few years?
Yeah, definitely. So I think big companies or large organizations have a unique advantage in this space. So they have the financial resources, so they can actually hire entire teams of data scientists and machine learning engineers. And they have the historical data available to really leverage machine learning. And assuming, hopefully, they've stored quite a bit of data, during their existence. So they have that to look back to use predictions for the future. And, machine learning is kind of like a tool, right? You can apply it in so many different arenas. So for a big company, this can be as straightforward as using regression to predict future operational costs for the finance department. For marketing and sales, you can fine tune your customer segmentation to find trends on who pays for your product the most or is really enthusiastic, and you can do really clever targeting. For hiring, you can flag really great candidates that could have been overlooked by applicant tracking systems. For customer support, you can use chatbots to, really help. If you have an overwhelming large amount of customer support requests, you can use that to automate the process. And obviously, there's, product differentiation, which is there's so many interesting machine learning applications, right? There's object recognition from images or fingerprint analysis, and all of these things you can find clever ways for a larger company, which has been in the field for a while, to kind of differentiate their product and put a new, spin on something that has been traditionally popular. So I guess for machine learning, like it's definitely like it's a tool, but it's also a toolkit because there's just so many different applications, and big companies do have the data to really leverage it.
So where are some of the places that you're looking to find publicly available data? Because I think that's one of the big advantages is, in a large organization, you have potentially just enormous amounts of information. And sometimes that's a difficulty because they need to figure out how to shape that stuff. But what are some of those places where you all can find good publicly available data that you can leverage?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for a startup, I think the process is likely a lot different. We start by trying to gather external data, whereas I think for a bigger corporation, they would try to, take a whole or have some kind of reins over their internal data sources first. But in general, if you're like just getting into machine learning or getting into data science, I think Kaggle is a really, really great resource. So not only do they have a lot of open data sets, they also have different ways people use those data sets, and that's completely open. So you can see regression or a KNN run against the same data set to produce different kinds of results. So it's not just a data set, but it's also how people can learn from it. And they have thousands and thousands of different ways. So you can always search for something that applies to you. I think one of the ways that we kind of take for granted is our social media feeds, right? If you're a large company or if you're a small company, you can use, Instagram or Twitter has open APIs where you can plop a sentiment analysis algorithm and figure out how your new feature is doing and how people are receiving it and how many tweets you get. Like those are all open data sources, which are you can leverage, and you definitely should leverage. Another really cool one, I think, is underrated, is Wikipedia. So Wikipedia most people know, has a lot of information about pretty much everything. But what they don't know is that the underlying data structure of Wikipedia is actually semantically linked. Semantically linked meaning it's not just a bunch of text on a web page. There's actually really deep relationships that represent objects. And from semantically linked data, you can actually do queries like, well, between years X and Y, who are the composers that produced, more than 20 hits? Some very, very sophisticated queries. And that's really cool. And Wikipedia's data source is also completely open and completely free. So you should be able to find something in your domain. And one last one I think is particularly good for people in different industries. Data.gov, which is US's initiative to have more open data sources regarding like historical census data or company industry data, employment data. That is there's so many things you can discover with your own company and industry and competitors and predicting trends and forecasting. So A lot of different data sources. If you're a big company, I would definitely say if you're not leveraging your own data internally, start there first. Because, as a startup, we wish we had more data, right? We have to collect this data and do our own forecasting based on the models of others.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think the way that you can get creative to find those things to, the Wikipedia API or leveraging data.gov. I think sometimes those are overlooked at times that, hey, maybe we should be looking at other sources other than our own to look for more information. So what are some of the other things that you're doing kind of in startup world that big companies might be able to, leverage or learn from?
So, as a startup, we're really lean. Our resources are pretty strapped, and we have to react really quickly to anything that comes at us. So, a lot of the things we do are being kind of scrappy with the tools that are around us. We leverage the insights of other startups a lot. For one, for our data collection from users, we use 3 or 4 different kinds of tools like Mixpanel, User Voice, Google Analytics. Obviously, everyone uses that. But these data sources also use machine learning internally. So we are able to kind of like leverage the tools of people that we use that do things really well. And I think big companies, when they have a problem, they usually like solving internally instead of looking outward for something that's already out there. And just customer data collection is just one of them. There's a lot of other things like we use barometrics for Stripe analytics. So they will provide us with some forecasting for our current revenue, future revenue, these things that I guess for us, we're not experts in forecasting revenue. So we want to still have that state-of-the-art expertise. So we're able to like find partners who do it for us.
What about using PII? How are you kind of looking at challenges with PII?
PII is really interesting. So we, like most companies, hustled to get GDPR compliant by the deadline. And a big portion is PI. So, I think we're lucky in the sense that we started at a point where we're very conscious of what we're storing and the privacy of user data. And we try our very best to not ask for your social security number or anything and we obviously we don't store those. So for a lot of it, we offload to PCI compliant partners, right? Do these for payment analytics or payment processing. We're like, okay, you guys are the experts. You guys handle this for us. And we're kind of lucky in that we started this process pretty early. For larger companies, for PII, it's hopefully something they've gotten at least a pulse on, and they have, the data stored somewhere where privacy is already kind of set in place by their clients or users or partners. And I think with the forecasting of something like GDPR potentially coming to California or United States in the future, it's definitely not a lesson learned from the startups, which is let's not wait till the last minute or last year to implement GDPR, right? It was a huge operational cost. And there are companies that basically said, okay, we're just not going to support users outside the United States because it's too expensive for us. But that's not a long-term mindset. That's just saying we're going to try to get out of it early. And for larger companies, they can't afford to do that. They can't afford to do that because sooner or later, you're going to have really good privacy guidelines coming in for the way you're handling user data. So if you don't have a pulse on it, you definitely should start thinking about that early.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think a lot of, the CIOs that we've talked to are trying to figure out how to get as far ahead of that as they can get. Do you think some of the, startups being wired for analytics day one and how that's built into how you're building, do you think that is something that's an advantage or something that, or the kind of lack of different systems, or do you still kind of have the same amount of systems across? We're like, Mark was saying that they had 400 systems for an 800 person company a while ago. Those type of numbers, and you're like, oh my goodness, that's crazy. But, in startups, you're just building a lot more lean. And do you think that that's kind of something that you've seen as an advantage compared to your days at Microsoft or whatever?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. So Microsoft, at least when I was working there, ship cycles were on the orders of years, where for startups, most startups I know are shipping, weekly, some daily. And when you have a customer feedback loop that's a magnitude difference, then obviously you can move faster, do things better, and react quicker. The fact that we are wired for analytics from day one is a necessity, right? If we can't react fast enough, we just don't have the resources to compete with a larger company. And larger companies definitely can learn from this. The first thing is getting a pulse on how your users are feeling. And that should be every single minute if you can. And we do this, technically, we do this really well. If the server breaks down, we know immediately because things are not working. But how do you know if your users aren't happy? How do you know if the new feature just doesn't really work? Right? Big companies, I think, sometimes have this hubris where they've been around for a while, they know what they're doing, they think the users are happy with whatever they're giving and delivering. But in reality, you need to really crunch numbers and dig into user behavior to see if you are getting the adoption numbers compared to a startup of in the same size. Like, are you guys comparable in how users feel about your product?
Switching gears to the talent side of things, obviously with JobScan, you see thousands and thousands of applicants go through getting their resumes scanned at JobScan. But for you personally, and for looking at technical talent, what are some of the best practices that you've seen, finding technical talent?
I think for any company, large or small, it's always a challenge. My favorite resource so far has been hire.com. I got referred to a couple of years ago by an engineering friend of mine who was looking for a job, and he finally landed at Google, but he just told me the process of matching was really, really high quality. And the ratio of high quality candidates and companies was really high. And that's also my experience and JobScan's experience using hire.com. So a lot of it is it's not really a numbers game. It's not throwing out as many applications or trying to maximize your exposure. It's how do you connect with the right people with a high ratio of being qualified and really good for you, right? So hire.com has, I don't know, they have some magic there that definitely works well. But definitely don't neglect the traditional channels. Like Indeed is huge. LinkedIn, definitely promo your position. If you have an open position on LinkedIn, you get thousands of more views that way. AngelList for smaller companies or startups is an absolute must. I would say if you're looking for something a little more specialized, if you're looking for, let's say, a data scientist or a machine learning engineer, definitely tap into those networks and get into those early, because you might find someone that's not on LinkedIn. You might find someone at a conference that is doing like an LLP presentation. They could just be the perfect person, but their first goal is not getting hired. Career fairs at school, if you have the resource and time to kind of get your brand out there, is always good. We're looking for a lot of really bright, eager students who are passionate about something in the beginning of their career. Yeah, and also Google Scholar, for something specialized is really good too. They actually have a lot of, if you're a master's student or a PhD student, you're going to have something probably listed in there.
That's a good one. I haven't heard that one before. That's a really good idea. Another thing that we talked about before getting on air was that reaching out as CTO was something that worked really well for you, or reaching out from the CEO's perspective. And obviously, in startup world, we got to fight and win talent against big folks sometimes. But I think that there's a really strong lesson there about how having a recruiter or whoever it is to reach out to someone, people are a little used to that, but having the actual person who's going to be their, supervisor or a couple levels above that can be really important. Can you share kind of some info about how you did that?
Oh, yes, definitely. Talking about the channels, but not really the methods. And for all the engineers that we've hired, I've, been the one sending out not just LinkedIn connects, but also scheduling for coffee before the interview, just to get them comfortable, get them excited, and find that connection, right? I think a lot of companies, for technical talent, they will send a recruiter ping first to see if there's interest, because that's a lot cheaper as a way to get talent. But really, when you have your CEO or CTO or the manager send that first email, even if it's automated, it just means a lot more for that candidate, because A, they know you looked at their LinkedIn or their resume, and there's some sort of weight behind it. And also on the same front, if you have a referral from a friend, or you're able to kind of pull a name like, oh, we both worked at Microsoft, or hey, I see we're connected to this person, that's also really helpful, because at any point you can bring a personal touch, I think is really good. Any point where you're adding more weight and substance to your ask, which is come meet with us, find out who we are, I think that's really helpful.
Didn't you say it was something like you had 3 times more response rates or something like that by having you reach out instead of the recruiter? I forget off the top of my head, but
not exactly 3, but I think I've had about 80. I only had one person that didn't respond to me. All the rest of them did. But I know with our HR recruiter, she didn't get the same response rate.
yeah, I mean, that's pretty good. Almost 100% response rate's pretty good. So what are some pieces of advice for, first time CTOs that you kind of feel are most useful, or that you've got over your 14-year career?
This is also a really good question. I wished someone gave me this advice much earlier, but one of my good friends, Alex Curlin, he's the co-founder of Learn Freckle, and he sent me this article much earlier, like a couple of years ago, which is The 5 Flavors of Being a CTO by Matt Tucker. And in this article, there's like 5 beers, and there are different flavors of beers. And basically, pick the flavor you want to be and be your own advocate early, because you're going to be asked to be the software architect, engineering manager, technical evangelist, PM at different times, and you'll be absolutely miserable and burn out if you try to wear all the hats. And CTO, as you will find being in that path, you are asked to wear many, many hats, and getting a ring of your own success criteria is really important early. And obviously, if you are leaving behind gaps when you do set up your criteria for this is the person I want to be, having this hiring strategy for the gaps you leave behind is also really important. Another good resource is Paul Graham. So Reddit, Y Combinator, super well-known person. He had this blog article about a segmentation of your time. And he said, well, when I first started this, I had my day by going to all the meetings I needed to go, and then starting my actual work, kind of actual work, technical work after dinner. So it's kind of like, do what works for you, but don't neglect part of your duties. You still need to go to meetings. You still need to do your technical individual work. At the same time, if you do need that flexibility of segmenting your day so you can focus on your technical work, don't be afraid to make a schedule that works for you.
Those are great. And I have not read either. I read a bunch of the Paul Graham essays, but I can't remember that one off the top of my head. I need to revisit. Any other stuff, pieces of advice for first-time CTOs or your fellow CTOs?
So I feel like, CTO technology is, to your first-time CTO, is always just like, oh, I'm going to find the coolest AWS stack for my product. I'm going to use the newest, frameworks and software. I'm going to make everything like just the coolest technology, right? But it's a lot more than that. And sure, your prototype can have all those cool things, bells and whistles. Your CEO is going to be really happy with you because it's going to look great. But then once you start getting users or revenue or traction, you're going to need business intelligence. You're going to need data pipelines for your data scientists. You're going to need user behavior funnel analysis. You're going to need marketing segmentation, customer feedback loops, email campaigns. And it's really important to plug those things into your product as early as possible, because you don't want to lose historical data. You don't want to fall into the trap of having almost like a big company hubris where you think your product is going to work. You really need those data pipelines in there as soon as possible. And a lot of these things are free, and there's going to be a lot of startups and smaller companies that provide those services free for you, and they provide very easy hooks. So don't assume you can build a better tool than what's out there. Just leverage what you have.
Okay, let's get into the lightning round. Lightning round is presented by the Lighting Platform by Salesforce. These are fast and easy questions. The previous ones, not so fast, not so easy. These ones, fast and easy. Not unlike the Lighting Platform. So let's get into it. All right, number 1. What app are you using on your phone that is the most fun?
Pokemon Go.
Favorite time-saving tool?
Slack.
Favorite use of AI or chatbots that you've seen recently?
I really love AlphaGo. I think it's it's an elegant algorithm, and the fact that they defeated the world champ in Go it blows my mind because it's such a complicated game. We learned very early in computer science that it's a really difficult problem. It's NP hard. So complexity-wise, it's just mind-boggling. But the fact that an algorithm can actually, computationally defeat a player that's that good, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's insane, and like the level of complexity of that is like insane. It's just wild. Do you have a favorite team, sports or otherwise?
And the Anaheim Angels, my childhood team. I grew up 5 minutes from the stadium, so.
Oh, nice. Favorite podcast or recent book?
I love audiobooks. So Steven Pinker, The Better Angels of Your Nature, which was actually recommended by Bill Gates recently, but I recommended it before Bill Gates. So I would like to think I'm the first,
Nice.
at least for Microsoft.
Well, and you're near Seattle, so maybe it was maybe he saw your recommendation.
I will take the credit. It's a really great book. I think whenever I feel a little bit down or something's not happening right in the world, I listen to a few more chapters. I'm just like, it's gonna be okay. I have a little bit more faith in humanity, so that's always a good feeling.
This too shall pass.
Yes, yes. I also really like The Mission. I listened to a couple of podcasts. David and Goliath was my first one, and I was just like, whoa, this is really cool. I didn't know a tech story can be told in this sense, and kind of blew my mind. So I do appreciate you guys too.
I love it. Thanks for the plug. Yeah, that episode of the story was really fun. Favorite one-day getaway in Seattle?
Ooh, Olympic Peninsula, I think right now is absolutely gorgeous. So you'll have the beach, you'll have the rainforest, you'll have hot springs. So whatever your heart desires, there's something there for you right now.
I'm sold. That sounds great. Okay, last question. What technology are you most excited about?
So I think there's a general trend of media being more and more driven by users. So you can see this in YouTube content creators. You can see this in Google allowing individuals to publish news articles, and Twitter, as almost like a secondary news source now. I am really excited about different platforms that really enable users in different spaces, not just the current ones that we have.
Couldn't agree more. We're hugely into creators here at the Mission, so we definitely agree with that. That's it for Lightning Round. Thanks again to our friends at Salesforce. With Salesforce, now building apps is everyone's business. You can learn more at salesforce.com/buildapps. All right. Anything else? This is great. Thanks so much for coming on IT Visionaries.
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you again to our friends at Salesforce. IT Visionaries is brought to you by the Lightning Platform by Salesforce, a leading cloud platform that makes building AI-powered apps faster and easier. With Salesforce, now everyone can build apps for their organization. Learn more at salesforce.com/buildapps.